I still remember the way she said it. Not the exact words, not the low hush of her voice, though that too, but the way it sat in the air after, heavy and private, like dust refusing to settle. This stays between us. I never forgot. But if I'm honest, the story didn't start there. It started smaller, almost embarrassingly ordinary. Every Sunday morning, I dragged myself down to the corner laundromat with a bag too heavy for one arm. The machines rattled, the floor always smelled faintly of detergent and burnt dust, and the same ceiling fan groaned like it was just barely keeping itself alive. It was a forgettable place, or it used to be, because that's where she was. Not every Sunday, but often enough that it felt like routine. She'd come in with a basket balanced against her hip, her hair pulled back in a loose knot, the kind that wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was in her 40s, mid, maybe late, and carried herself with the kind of tired elegance that made everyone else look like they were trying too hard. She wasn't my mom. She wasn't even my neighbor. She was my friend's mom. That made it complicated. At first, I only nodded politely, the way you do when you see someone you half know in a public place. She'd nod back. Sometimes that was it. Other times, she'd make a comment about the broken coin machine or the way the dryers ate socks. Little remarks, barely more than passing air. But she always said them with a kind of crooked smile, as if she was letting me in on something small but shared. One morning, I got there earlier than usual. The place was nearly empty. She was already there, folding clothes at the counter, sleeves rolled up, the sunlight from the dusty window falling across her arms. I pretended to busy myself with sorting, but I couldn't help watching the neat, precise way she folded each shirt, smoothing out wrinkles with a practiced hand. She noticed. "You're too rough with those," she said without looking up. "They'll look like rags in a month." I laughed awkwardly. "Yeah, well, nobody's grading me on laundry." That got me a glance, quick, amused, almost conspiratorial. Maybe they should. It was such a small thing, but I felt it. The way her eyes lingered for a half-second longer than polite. The way my chest tightened like I was standing too close to the dryer heat. Over the weeks, it became a pattern. Sometimes we'd talk, not about anything important, never directly about ourselves. Work, weather, how my friend, her son, never bothered to do his own laundry when he was home. She said it with a sigh that carried both exasperation and affection. Other times, we didn't talk at all. Just moved around each other in that cramped space, the silence filled by the thrum of machines and the static crackle of the radio. But even then, there was something there. In the way I became too aware of how close she stood. In how I noticed the faint smell of her shampoo when she brushed past me. In the way she glanced at me sometimes, like she wanted to say something and thought better of it. I didn't understand it then, the pull of it, the weight. I just knew that something ordinary was no longer ordinary. The laundromat was the same. The machine still rattled, the fan still groaned, the detergent still stung my nose. But the air between us carried something unspoken, something neither of us named, but both of us felt. And eventually, it became something I could never forget. Part 2. Expanding the conflict. There's one afternoon I keep circling back to. Not because of anything dramatic. No storm, no argument, no grand reveal. Just a Sunday that should have been like all the others. But something shifted. The laundromat was quieter than usual, the kind of quiet where you hear the buzz of the fluorescent lights. She came in a little late, basket heavier than normal, and I noticed her wince as she set it down. "You okay?" I asked before I could stop myself. She smiled, a little too quickly. "Shouldn't carry so much at once." I don't know why I did it, but I offered to help. Pulled the basket closer to the machine. It was a small gesture, but the way she exhaled, not relief, exactly, more like she wasn't used to anyone noticing, it stayed with me. She sat on the plastic chair while the washer churned, rubbing her wrist absent-mindedly. I hesitated, then dropped into the seat next to her. Too close, maybe. The kind of closeness you could excuse in a crowded room, but not in an empty one. She didn't move away. We didn't talk much at first, just the whir of the machines. Then she said, almost offhand, "I used to come here with his father, when we were first married, before we had the house. His father, my friend's dad. She said it like it didn't matter, but her eyes went distant, following something I couldn't see. I wasn't sure if I was supposed to answer, so I just nodded. She kept going, softer now. Funny, how you don't expect the small things to outlast the big ones. I thought about that. How her marriage had collapsed. Everyone knew. My friend had mentioned the divorce once in a clipped, defensive way, like it was a bruise he didn't want touched. I never asked. But sitting there, I saw the bruise in her too. Not raw anymore, but still tender if pressed. I wanted to say something comforting, but the words caught. Instead, I just said, I like the small things. It sounded stupid, but it made her glance at me. Really glance. Like she was weighing whether to believe me. The rest of the wash passed in silence. But it wasn't empty. It was charged, full of the words we didn't say. When the dryers hummed, she stood and brushed her palms against her jeans. It wasn't an invitation so much as a test. Still, I said yes. Her apartment was neat but lived in, a mix of soft lamps and stacks of books on the coffee table. She set a chipped mug in front of me, steam curling from the top. Chamomile. We sat across from each other, cups in hand. She curled one leg beneath her, casual in a way that made me too aware of myself. Your mom doesn't worry about you? She asked suddenly. I laughed nervously. She probably would, if she knew how much ramen I eat. That made her smile. A real one, small but unguarded. I wanted to hold on to it. And yet, the weight of it pressed down. She was my friend's mother. Twice my age. Someone I was supposed to admire from a distance, not sit here drinking tea with, wondering how her hands would feel if she reached across the table. The thought made me flush, and I looked down quickly, pretending to study the mug. But she noticed. She noticed everything. Her tone softened. You're quiet. I shrugged. Just thinking. About what? I shook my head. Doesn't matter. She tilted her head, waiting. I didn't give her more. But in that moment, with her eyes holding mine, I felt the question hang in the air. What if I told her? What if I crossed that line? I didn't. Instead, I made some offhand joke about how I'd probably ruin her tea habit by adding too much sugar. She laughed, low and warm, and reached over to slide the bowl of sugar closer to me. Our hands brushed, not long, not deliberate, just skin against skin for the barest second. But it was enough. Enough to burn itself into me. Part 3. The emotional conflict unfolds. It didn't take much. A change in routine. One missing Sunday. The next week, she wasn't at the laundromat. I told myself it didn't matter, but I lingered anyway, folding too slow, waiting for a door to open that never did. When she finally appeared the following week, I almost said something, almost teased her for skipping out, but the words jammed in my throat. She looked tired, hair pulled loose, shadows under her eyes. Still beautiful, maybe even more so, but with a kind of edge. I asked if she was okay. She only gave me a half smile, the kind that shuts a door before you can look inside. Later, when we ended up back at her apartment, not planned, just natural drift, the silence between us felt heavier than usual. I sat on the edge of the couch, her across the room, pouring tea like it was just another Sunday. But her hands shook. Slightly. Just enough to make the teaspoon rattle against the cup. Long week? I asked. She didn't answer right away. Then, your friend was over yesterday. The words hit harder than I expected. My friend. Her son. The invisible wall between us. Oh, I swallowed. Right. She looked at me then, sharp, searching. He said you were busy. That you've been distracted. I couldn't tell if it was an accusation or just observation. Either way, I felt caught. The air in the room grew too warm. I set my cup down, leaned forward, elbows on my knees. She mirrored me without meaning to, both of us leaning into a space that felt suddenly too narrow. Distracted how? I asked, my voice lower than I intended. Her eyes flickered. You tell me. We stayed there, suspended, neither moving closer, neither pulling away. My pulse jumped, my throat dry. And then, a knock at her door. We both startled. Her neighbor calling out, muffled through the wood, asking if she had extra laundry coins. She stood quickly, almost gratefully, and I leaned back, trying to look like I hadn't just been teetering on the edge of something dangerous. When she came back, She didn't sit beside me. She took the chair instead. Distance restored. Still, the silence pressed in. I could hear the tick of her wall clock, the faint hum of the fridge. Finally, she said, almost to herself, "This is not a good idea." My chest tightened. I wanted to ask what this meant. The tea, the Sundays, the way her eyes lingered. But I didn't, because I already knew. We talked about nothing after that. Weather, groceries, how the laundromat needed a new fan. I laughed too loud at something she said. She stirred her tea, though it didn't need stirring. And then, as I got up to leave, we stood too close in the doorway. Close enough that I felt her breath when she exhaled. Her hand brushed mine when she reached for the doorknob. Neither of us moved for a second, just held there. I almost leaned in. She almost let me. But then she whispered, barely audible, "Go." So I did. But that moment, that almost, followed me all the way home. Part 4. Nearing the climax, it wasn't planned. None of it ever was. That's what made it feel dangerous. How it all unfolded in ordinary places, like a thread you don't notice pulling until half the fabric is gone. This time, it was outside. I had bumped into her near the corner store, bags in my hands, headphones around my neck. She was coming out with a small paper sack, and I offered to walk her back. She hesitated, then nodded. It was early evening. The air had that soft, gold heaviness, cicadas buzzing low. We didn't talk much at first, just the shuffle of our steps, the crinkle of the paper bag she held. And then, as if to fill the space, she asked, "How's school?" I told her I wasn't sure, that some days I thought about dropping out, that classes felt pointless, that I wasn't who everyone assumed I'd be. I said it lightly, but it came out truer than I meant. She glanced at me, brows drawn, but didn't scold or reassure. She just said, "I know what that feels like." Her voice was low, even. The kind you lean into because you're not sure you were meant to hear it. We reached a park bench near her building. She set the bag down, sat, and gestured for me to join her. For a long minute, we just watched the street. Kids on bikes. A couple arguing softly near a car. Someone carrying groceries up the steps. And then, without looking at me, she said, "You remind me of him." I froze. Her son. My friend. But she shook her head quickly, as if correcting herself. Not him exactly. Just the age. The way you carry the world like it's heavier than it should be. I didn't know what to do with that. My hands clenched around my knees. "Does that bother you?" I asked. Her eyes flicked to mine. It should. Silence stretched, longer this time. I felt every inch of it. The sound of my own heartbeat filled the gaps. Finally, I said, "You ever wish things were different?" Her lips parted. She didn't answer right away. Then, all the time. It felt like a confession, though it wasn't meant as one. I wanted to ask different how, but I was afraid of the answer. Instead, I said quietly, "Sometimes I think about what it'd be like. If this," I gestured between us, vague, useless, "wasn't wrong." The words slipped out before I could drag them back. My chest tightened as soon as they hung in the air. She turned to me then. Really turned. Her eyes caught mine and held, steady, unblinking. "You shouldn't say that," she whispered. "I know. You don't know." Her voice wavered just enough to betray something underneath. Guilt. Fear. Maybe both. She pressed her palms together like she needed to hold herself in. I swallowed hard. "Then tell me to stop." Her breath hitched. She didn't. The park felt too quiet now. Every sound sharper. A dog's bark, the squeak of swings, the rustle of wind in the leaves. Everything ordinary except the space between us, thick and fragile. I leaned forward, elbows on my thighs, head in my hands for a moment, trying to steady myself. She sat stiff, unmoving. Finally, she said, barely audible, "You have no idea what you're asking." I lifted my head. "I'm not asking." Another pause. Her gaze softened, and for the first time, I saw something crack. A wall, chipped open. Vulnerability bleeding through. "You don't know what it's like," she murmured, almost to herself. To be looked at like that again. After so long. The confession hit me harder than anything else. I wanted to reach for her hand, to close the space, to show her I meant it. But I didn't move. Neither did she. We just sat there, staring, the world moving on around us. And then she asked, quiet, breaking, the question hanging like a blade. What are we doing? Part 5. The twist. The week after the park bench, everything shifted. Not because of something I did. Because she stopped. Sunday morning came, and she wasn't at the laundromat. Not unusual in itself. Sometimes she skipped a week, but it felt different. The kind of absence you notice in your chest, not your eyes. I waited anyway, folding clothes I didn't care about, killing time I didn't have. She never came. Monday, Tuesday, nothing. No accidental run-ins, no tea, no glimpses of her crossing the hallway. By Wednesday, I started wondering if I'd imagined the whole thing. Finally, Thursday night, I saw her. She was outside her apartment, keys fumbling in her hand. Dressed in something nicer than usual, a dark dress, hair pinned back, heels dangling from her fingers like she couldn't wait to be rid of them. She looked untouchable. I opened my mouth to say something, to ask, but she beat me to it. Don't. The word wasn't sharp, just tired. Like a door closing without a slam. I froze in the hallway, groceries sweating in my hands, and watched her slip inside before I could move. The next day, my friend mentioned, casually, like it didn't matter, that his dad had been around. Some dinner, some trying again conversation. He rolled his eyes, said it wouldn't last. But the way he said it made my stomach drop. Of course. Her ex. The shadow I hadn't seen but should have known was there. The days stretched. I kept waiting for some sign. A glance, a word, a reason. Something. But she was different. Still polite, still composed, but distant. Like someone had gone in and dimmed the light behind her eyes. When we crossed paths, her smile felt rehearsed. I caught myself replaying the park bench, the way her voice cracked, the way she'd said after so long. I wondered if she regretted saying it, if she hated that she let herself slip, or if she was scared that I had hurt her at all. One night, late, I walked past her door. I don't know why. Maybe I thought I'd knock. Maybe I thought she'd open it, and everything would make sense again. I stood there, hand hovering, pulse in my ears. And then I pictured her son inside. My friend. I pictured her ex-husband sitting on that couch, maybe drinking tea from the same chipped mug she once gave me. I lowered my hand. Back in my room, I stared at my phone. I typed out a message I knew I'd never send. Did I do something wrong? Should I stay away? That night on the bench, was it nothing to you? Each line disappeared beneath my thumb before it could breathe. Drafts eaten by silence. In the end, the screen was blank again. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. The next Sunday, I went to the laundromat. The machine still rattled, the fan still groaned, the detergent still stung my nose. Her chair sat empty, and I folded slower than ever, as if dragging it out might change something. As if maybe, just maybe, the door would open and she'd walk in again. But it never did. Part 6. The climax. It didn't happen on a Sunday. It was a Tuesday evening, cool and gray, the kind of weather that presses down and makes the lights in every window look lonelier than usual. I had finished a late class, carrying the same tired backpack, when I saw her outside the building. She was standing by the steps, arms wrapped tight around herself, though it wasn't that cold. A paper bag sat at her feet, like she'd dropped it there and forgotten. When her eyes met mine, something flickered. Not surprise, not even guilt. Just exhaustion. I almost walked past. Almost gave her the distance she seemed to want. But I stopped. Hey. She exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for weeks. Hi. Her voice was small. Smaller than I'd ever heard it. We ended up inside her kitchen. I don't even remember deciding to go in. It just happened. The kettle hummed low on the stove. The chipped mugs were back on the counter. It should have felt familiar, safe, but everything was sharper, heavier, like the edges of the room had teeth. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed. I sat at the table, backpack slouched on the floor. Neither of us touched the mugs. Finally, I said, "You've been avoiding me." Her eyes closed for a moment, then opened. Yes. The honesty stung more than a lie would have. Why? My voice cracked on it. She shook her head, almost smiled, but it was bitter. Because this isn't fair. Not to you. Not to him. She didn't have to say who him was. My friend. Her son. The line between us. I rubbed my hands over my face, trying to steady myself. I don't. I stopped, started again. I don't want fair. I just want. I don't even know what I want. But it's not nothing. Her arms tightened across her chest. You think it's that simple? I think it doesn't have to be this complicated. That made her laugh. Not cruel, just broken. God, you're young. The words should have cut, but they didn't. They sounded more like regret than insult. The kettle clicked off. Neither of us moved to pour the water. She looked at me then, really looked, like she was memorizing me. And in that silence, I felt the truth hanging, raw and unbearable. She wanted this too. She just couldn't let herself want it out loud. I haven't felt. She stopped, started again, her voice barely audible. I haven't let myself feel seen in a long time. The room went still. And before I could think, I said, then don't stop now. Her breath caught. She turned away, one hand braced on the counter, her shoulders rising and falling. When she spoke again, it was fractured. If I let this happen, if I let you in, it won't end the way you think. It'll hurt you. It'll hurt me. It'll ruin everything. I don't care. You should. The words hung. I wanted to argue. I wanted to reach for her. But the weight in her voice held me still. I realized then, this wasn't about winning or convincing. It was about letting her know I saw her, fully, without hiding. So I stood, slowly, crossed the small space between us. Close enough to feel her warmth. Close enough to touch, though I didn't. Her eyes lifted to mine, wet but steady. And I whispered, okay, then let it hurt. For a long moment, she didn't move, didn't breathe, just stared at me like she was at war with herself. Then, finally, her hand brushed mine. Not a grab, not a claim. Just the barest touch, trembling, human. I curled my fingers around hers, light as I could. No kiss, no collapse. Just a touch, just a quiet surrender. She gave the smallest nod, almost a smile. Okay. Part 7. The conclusion time didn't stop after that night. It never does. Classes dragged on. Rent came due. My friend still texted me dumb memes at 2 in the morning. Life rolled forward, ordinary as ever. But something had shifted. She didn't vanish again. She didn't rush forward either. We just eased. Sundays at the laundromat turned steady again. Same hum of machines, same squeak of the fan. Except now, sometimes, she'd sit beside me instead of across. Sometimes she'd pass me a folded shirt to do over, smirking when I botched it. And sometimes, not every time, but enough, our knees would touch. Lightly, not moved away. Evenings happened too. Not dramatic ones. Just little slips of time. A cup of tea on her couch after my late classes. A grocery run where we compared prices on coffee brands like it was the most important decision in the world. We didn't talk about what we were. Didn't give it a name. But the silence no longer felt dangerous. It felt like something we had both decided to keep. There were still complications. Of course there were. Her ex lingered like a shadow, sometimes circling back, sometimes vanishing again. Her son, my friend, called often, and I learned to keep my voice steady in the background, to stay invisible when needed. And yet, she never treated me like a secret. Not exactly. Just a quiet part of her life. A part she let herself keep. One night, we walked past the park again. The same bench where everything almost broke. We didn't sit, not then. But she glanced at it, and I caught the corner of her smile. It was enough. Months blurred. Spring into summer. The kettle still whistled in her kitchen. The chipped mugs still sat on the shelf. Only now, I knew which one she liked best. How she always stirred her tea twice even if nothing needed dissolving. I knew the shape of her silences. The way she tilted her head when she didn't believe me. The way her laughter came slower on tired days, but still found its way out. And she learned me too. Like how I always left my laundry till the last minute. How I took my coffee black at 8:47 a.m. before class, but only if I remembered to set the timer. How I carried too much weight on my shoulders and tried too hard to look unbothered. She saw it all, and she stayed. We didn't cross every line. Not right away. Maybe not ever in the way people would expect. But there was a warmth, steady and unspoken, that threaded itself into the spaces of my days. Not fireworks. Not grand declarations. Just presence. The kind that makes the world quieter, softer, less lonely. The last time I thought about leaving, about pulling back before it went too far, I remembered something she'd said that night in her kitchen. If I let this happen, it'll hurt you. And I realized maybe she was right. Maybe it would hurt. Maybe it already had, in small ways. But hurt wasn't the whole story, because alongside it was something steadier, something worth holding on to. The bench, the tea, the brush of a hand against mine, the quiet okay. So now, when I sit across from her, or beside her, and the clock ticks, and the kettle hums, and nothing extraordinary is said, I don't need to ask what we're doing anymore. I already know. And she does too. It's not perfect. It's not simple. But it's ours. Sometimes, late at night, I think about that first time she told me, this stays between us. And now, months later, when our eyes meet over chipped mugs or in the reflection of a laundromat window, I realize something simple. It never really stayed between us. It became us.